Open the podcast bay door as hell.
Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 15 of Welcome to Geek Town. I'm your host, Kurt Onstead. I've been a proud geek all my life, being into role-playing games, board games, sci-fi, fantasy, and especially superheroes and comics. And I want to help others join me in those pursuits. But I found that sometimes people can get overwhelmed or feel left out because they don't already have what some consider to be the requisite knowledge to be considered a fan. And that's where Welcome to Geektown comes in. Here you can ask your questions without feeling like a gatekeeper is calling you out for not yet being fully versed in every aspect of your new interest. This week, we're going back to a recurring feature whose first episode was number 7. Justin B. asked, what happens to the replacement heroes when the originals come back? Since the answer to that varies so much depending on which replacement you're talking about, I've decided that every once in a while I'll pick out a hero that has been replaced at least once over the years, and tell you about the character or characters that took their place. The first time, we looked at the various Captains America. For this second installment of The Replacements, let's go to the other big blue Boy Scout, aka Superman. Now, for each of the characters I'll be discussing, their histories have changed between the post-crisis timeline and the New 52 timeline. If those two phrases confuse you, be sure to go back to episode 1 of Welcome to Geektown, where I bring you up to speed on the various timelines of the DC universe and how they interconnect. Once you've digested that, come on back. Ready? Because this episode is one of the longer ones. Let's get started. There are a number of stories, especially in the Silver Age, where Superman asks someone to disguise themselves as him, either in his superheroic identity or as Clark Kent, usually in order to throw people off the track who were getting close to discovering his secret identity. Among these include Batman, Martian Manhunter, Supergirl, and one of many Superman robots. I'm not going to focus on those too much, but I did want to acknowledge them quickly. Instead, we want to look at those who have, in one way or another, claimed to be Superman's successor during the time it seemed that he was gone. Almost everyone is at least somewhat familiar with the 1992 storyline titled The Death of Superman. In fact, many of my non-comic book reading friends for years assumed that this death was permanent, and so when I mentioned something happening in the Superman titles, they'd ask, isn't he dead? But no one stays dead in comics unless you're Uncle Ben or Batman's parents, so of course Superman did come back. But there was a period of time where 4 different characters, in one way or another, took up the Man of Steel's mantle before Kal-El's eventual return. Let's take a look at each of them, see how they came to be, and where they've ended up. We'll go in chronological order of their first appearance, which starts us with the Eradicator. First appearing in Action Comics Annual number 2 in 1989, the Eradicator began its existence as a machine that actually bore some resemblance to a handheld-size version of Superman's birthing chamber in its post-crisis appearance. When Superman first encounters it, it had been programmed to protect all Kryptonians by any means necessary, even by eradicating any other species it encounters to do so, thus its name. At the time, Superman had put himself in self-imposed exile in space, after feeling guilty for killing 3 evil Kryptonians that had found their way to Earth from an alternate universe. The Eradicator had been in the hands of Krypton's only other survivor, an ancient Kryptonian simply known as the Cleric. However, with the Cleric's death, the Eradicator linked itself to Superman, who very soon returned to Earth. The Eradicator was responsible for the creation of Superman's Fortress of Solitude in the post-crisis timeline. However, soon thereafter, it reverted to its original programming, attempting to convert Earth into a new Krypton through various means. Superman was able to defeat it each time. During one of those fights, the Eradicator became a being of pure energy rather than the small rocket-shaped device it had been up until this point. Superman's death at the hands of Doomsday happened shortly after this story, which is when the robots in the Fortress of Solitude gather up that energy and put it into an organic form resembling Superman himself. Nicknamed in the media as the last son of Krypton, the Eradicator believed himself to be Superman, even having some of his memories, although he was much more ruthless as a crime fighter, maiming and even killing criminals with no due process. Of course, the true Superman eventually returned from the dead, but basically powerless. The climactic fight of the Return of Superman story gives Kal-El his powers back when a kryptonite blast focused through the Eradicator's body hits Superman. This blast seemingly kills the Eradicator, but returns Superman to full strength. Like many other characters, though, the Eradicator eventually returned from the dead, merging his energy with a dying doctor named David Connor. This version of the character joined the team known as the Outsiders. However, it turns out that the Fortress of Solitude still held the original Eradicator program, and once again it tried to recreate Krypton. Although, how it's going to do that with only one male Kryptonian is never explained. The David Connor Eradicator merged with the Fortress to take control and remove it from Earth. He later returns during the Our Worlds at War crossover, in a manic state, warning of the coming of the main villain from that storyline, Imperiex. He's eventually cured of his mania and returns to the Outsiders team. Finally, during the Reign of Doomsday storyline, Eradicator helps fight and defeat Doomslayer, a Doomsday-like creature bent on destroying Superman. The Eradicator disappears with Doomslayer at the end of this fight, teleported away, and never to be seen again in post-crisis continuity. In the Rebirth era of DC, the Eradicator has reappeared, although with a new history. This version of the Eradicator was created by General Zod in order to find and capture Kryptonian lawmakers back before the planet's death. Upon the planet's explosion, it noted baby Kal-El's rocket speeding off, and did its best to follow it, but didn't arrive on Earth until much later. Originally a machine, it takes on a Superman-like appearance after entering the Fortress of Solitude. This is a new fortress, not the one that the original Eradicator made, and absorbs some of Superman's belongings into its memory. Superman and this new Eradicator fight, as the Eradicator wants to remove the quote-unquote impure human DNA from Superman's son. Of course, Superman winds up victorious. Eradicators can also be seen on General Zod's colonized planet dubbed New Krypton, mostly in the Green Lantern books, although none of these Eradicators are the original. Okay, that's probably the most confusing of the 4 we'll be looking at, although number 2 comes close. This is Hank Henshaw. He first appeared in Superman number 42, as one of 4 characters designed as part of a dark take on the Fantastic Four's origin. This 2-issue story had 4 crew members of the Excalibur space shuttle affected by the radiation of a solar flare. This causes their ship to crash and for their bodies to change. Unlike Marvel's first family, their mutations continued for the worse, and 2 of the 4 die. Hank, working in a LexCorp lab with the help of Superman, is able to save his wife Terry, the final member of the crew, just before Hank's body completely deteriorated. We later find out that Hank's mind lived on and had transferred into the computers at LexCorp. Finding himself able to control machinery, he builds a robotic body to live in. When he goes to reunite with his wife Terry, she instead commits suicide in a desperate, insane attempt to get away from him. He decides to leave Earth and beams his body into Superman's old birthing matrix, rebuilding it into a craft designed for exploring space. While away, Henshaw becomes delusional and paranoid, believing Superman himself to be responsible for his condition. He encounters and teams up with Mongol, an intergalactic warlord who's also bent on defeating Superman. Returning to Earth right after the battle between Superman and Doomsday, he uses the knowledge gained from the Kryptonian birthing matrix to build himself a new body genetically identical to Superman's, albeit with many of the parts replaced by Kryptonian machinery. This gives him the nickname he'll go by from then on, Cyborg Superman. Pretending to be the true Superman reborn, he ingratiates himself to the world by acting heroic for a while. But this is all part of his plan to destroy Superman's reputation by overtaking his life. Then, Mongol lands on Earth, and Cyborg Superman reveals his true origin and allows Mongol to destroy Coast City. Superman returns and defeats both Mongol and the Cyborg Superman. However, with his ability to put his consciousness into almost any machine, Hank lives on. The Cyborg Superman has returned to haunt Superman in a few stories since then. However, because he was part of the destruction of Coast City, home to Green Lantern Hal Jordan and his friends and family, Henshaw has been mostly a foil for the Green Lantern Corps since then. He became the Grand Master of the Manhunters, the robotic force that fights the Lanterns for control of the universe. Later, he joined the Sinestro Corps, gaining 10 yellow rings, each equal in power and ability to the Green Lantern's rings, and later was part of both the Brightest Day and Blackest Night storylines, each named after a part of the Green Lantern Oath.
In brightest day,
in blackest night, no evil shall escape my sight.
When DC rebooted their continuity in the New 52, we were given both a new Hank Henshaw and a Cyborg Superman without his memories. Soon, however, DC course-corrected, bringing back the Cyborg Superman's memories of being Hank Henshaw during the Rebirth storyline that gave us the pre-New 52 Superman back as well. Since then, he returned to Earth to form a team called the Superman Revenge Squad in order to, get revenge on Superman. That was probably obvious. Unfortunately for him, he was betrayed by General Zod, another member of the squad, and ended up trapped in the Phantom Zone. Superman tried to help Hank by releasing him from the zone and putting his consciousness inside a Kryptonian memory crystal, where he would be able to relive happier times in a dreamlike world. Cyborg Superman has since escaped from there and is once again making the Green Lantern's lives miserable. Moving on from the two more villainous Supermen, let's look at the two heroes to arise out of the death and return of Superman. First of these two is John Henry Irons, better known as Steel. Of the four replacements, John is the only one who did not claim to be Superman in any way. John was a former weapons engineer who was now working in construction. We later learn that he was in hiding from a corporation that was trying to force him to continue working on weapons after having a change of heart. While on the construction site he was now working at, Superman saved him, and when John asked how he could repay the hero, Superman told him to, quote, live a life worth saving. This inspired John, and so, after Superman's death, and finding that weapons he had helped design were now being used on the streets, John used his skills to create a suit of armor, on which he emblazoned the S of Superman's shield, in homage to the man who had saved him in more ways than one. Unlike the previous two characters, John's first appearance was his cameo at the end of Adventures of Superman number 500, the beginning of the Reign of the Superman story, and so all of this history was to be learned in flashbacks later. After the reign of the Supermen was over, and the true Man of Steel returned, he gave John his seal of approval to continue wearing the shield and to use the Steel name. John graduated into his own solo title at this time, where we met his family, including his niece Natasha, who becomes important down the line. Steel has a number of adventures in his own title, moving first to Washington, D.C., then to Jersey City in New Jersey. Running 52 issues, ironically this is before 52 became an important number to DC. Again, see episode 1 if you need that explained. Steel's book was eventually cancelled. Steel soon joined the Justice League, and even led the reserve team while the main team went 1 million years into the future. While he stepped down from full-time status after a while, he continued to be a supporting cast member of both the Justice League and the Superman titles, acting as a technical or scientific advisor of sorts. During the Imperiex War, that's the Our Worlds at War storyline mentioned during the Eradicator discussion, Steel ended up injured enough to hang up the suit of armor himself, and built one for his niece, Natasha, who became the new Steel. Natasha and John played a large role in the weekly series 52. I don't want to give all the details of that storyline away, as it's one of the books I most recommend for people who want a great story that doesn't focus on the big three of DC, Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. But I will say that the uncle and niece have a rough patch, but work their way through it. The pair star in the 2007 version of Infinity Inc., which then leads into the storyline called Final Crisis. John is seen a couple of times after that, but not much until after the New 52 reboot. In the rebooted version of DC, John Henry Irons worked on the government's Steel Soldier program, but quit after seeing Superman being tortured by Lex Luthor as part of the experimentation. He dons his suit for the first time in this continuity when helping Superman take down Metallo. He's appeared here and there since then, and his niece Natasha is also back in her Steel outfit, as part of the current Titans book, where she uses both her armor and her natural intelligence to help deal with the new energy released from the breaking of the Source Wall. I'd love to get into that, but this episode is getting long enough as it is. So finally, we come to the fourth and final member of the Superman replacements, Superboy. This brand new character was not Superman as a teenager, but instead was an artificially created being aged to his teenage years. Project Cadmus, one of the many super science labs in the DC universe, had wanted to create their own Superman loyal to them. However, before the aging process and forced compliance programming was complete, Superboy escaped custody and roamed around Metropolis, claiming to be the clone of Superman. We eventually learned that was not the case. Originally, both he and the readers were told that he was a clone from Cadmus director Paul Westfield, whose genetics were altered to make him as close to a Kryptonian as possible. This was retconned later, but we'll get to that. Because Superboy is not a true Kryptonian, his powers are a little different from Superman's. He has a telekinetic field that surrounds his body, and anything directly touching it, giving him what is called tactile telekinesis. This gives him super strength, flight, and invulnerability, as well as allowing him to take apart and reshape objects he's holding. He has no heat vision, X-ray vision, freeze breath, or other powers that Superman, Supergirl, and other true Kryptonians display under Earth's yellow sun, although early in his career he did get a pair of super goggles that mimicked the vision powers. Superboy acted like a stereotypical teenage boy when he first showed up, mostly motivated by girls, money, and popularity, and did what he could to distance himself from Superman after his return. In part due to his act first, think later approach to life when he first started, Superboy ended up in Hawaii on the last leg of a promotional tour and decided to settle down there for some time. But most boys grow up eventually, and Superboy was no exception. Superman and he sat down for a talk at the Fortress of Solitude, and the Man of Steel told Superboy that he considered him to be a part of his family, and even offered him a Kryptonian name, Kon-El. Superboy not only joined Superman's Kryptonian family, but became part of his human family as well, spending some time living with Ma and Pa Kent, eventually adopting the human name of Connor Kent. It was around this time that Superboy became one of the founding members of Young Justice, a team of younger sidekicks and other legacy characters like Robin, Wonder Girl, Impulse, and Arrowette. This team lasted for some time in a fun series written by Peter David. That team disbanded after the events of the Graduation Day story, which ended with the untimely death of Donna Troy. Most of the team ended up getting back together to form one of the many incarnations of the Titans. This run, written by Jeff Johns, is when Superboy's origin was retconned, as I mentioned earlier. Superboy started to exhibit true Kryptonian powers at this time, like heat vision and super senses. We soon find out that instead of being an altered human starting from the genes of the director of Cadmus, Connor was actually a Kryptonian human hybrid, using genes from Superman for the Kryptonian side, and for his human side, Lex Luthor. In addition, we discover Lex had implanted mind-controlling programming into the process, and could now control the Boy of Steel whenever he liked. Finding this out made Superboy question if he was worthy of being a hero, and took a leave of absence from the Titans, retreating back to the Kent farm. A life of peace was not to be, however. Superboy was one of many casualties of the Infinite Crisis storyline that reintroduced the multiverse to the DC universe. He remained dead until the final crisis 2 years later, in the miniseries Legion of Three Worlds. He got a new ongoing solo series soon after that, which continued until the full reboot of the New 52. With this new continuity, Superboy had an entirely new origin. He was still a half-human, half-Kryptonian clone. However, he was now the clone of Superman and Lois Lane's future son, John Lane Kent, who, in an alternate future, grows up to be a genocidal maniac dedicated to destroying all metahumans, despite being one himself. This version of Superboy has been mostly swept aside and forgotten, as Superman and Lois's actual son, Jonathan Samuel Kent, has now taken on that mantle. However, it turns out the pre-New 52 Connor Kent version will be returning soon as part of the Rebirth continuity, in a new Young Justice title written by Brian Michael Bendis. Well, that took a lot longer than I was expecting when I first sat down to write this. Turns out these characters' histories are somewhat complicated. It wouldn't surprise me if this just ended up raising more questions for you listeners. If it did, please send them my way by emailing me at welcometogeektown@gmail.com, or leave a comment directly on the show notes at www.welcome2geektown.com. Other contact options include facebook.com/welcometogeektown or Twitter @geektownpodcast. In the meantime, don't forget to subscribe and give me a 5-star review over on iTunes to join the Geektown City Council and help other people find the show, so we can all tell them, welcome to Geektown, population, us. Welcome to Geektown is written, narrated, edited, and produced by me, Kurt Onstead. Theme music is by Aaron Levitz, logo art by Archie Santana. All other sound clips are the copyrighted material of their respective owners, and no infringement is intended, falling under fair use.